Hello and welcome to the CBB Supershow, brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, and we are officially in the tournament. Play-in games have begun. We had a really interesting set of NIT games that just took place, and then our boys from Howard, unfortunately, struggled a bit and did bow out after a nice second half run. And then, of course, we saw Virginia, a team that a lot of us didn't believe should have made the tournament. Made no changes to our minds there with the way that they played and got just absolutely curb stomped by Colorado State. Lots of Virginia talk in the FTN CBB Discord right now. Appreciate everybody who is checking us out on a little bit earlier tonight. Have a co-host with me that I'm going to pop on here in a second. Kind of forces me to be on my efficient side and not just go on super late. Last night was amazing. A lot of you guys stayed up with me until like 5 a.m. on the East Coast, giving my little narratives about my bracket picks. That did a very, very good job on the show, and a lot of people liked that, so I appreciate that very much. If you're new to the program, as we say, please make sure you guys hit the like button. Those interactions help us so much with engagements. And if you're a veteran as well, please also questions, comments, concerns, sharing the show, and dropping that like button. It is a huge help. There's a lot of content for CBB hopping up on YouTube because of what I do with the CBB brackets and everything. And what I did last night, my YouTube has been popping up all these different random people that I've never heard of that are doing brackets, and they're getting thousands of views. And I don't know who they are, and I don't plan on watching those shows. So I know we can do just as good, if not better, as some of those fly-by-night random people that are popping on. All right, what we do here, in case you forgot, we cover CBB from a DFS, PrizePicks, prop betting, and overall betting perspective. What we do is go true game-by-game analysis for the slate. We're going to be covering the Wednesday play-in / NIT slate. DraftKings focus over on FanDuel. They are doing the play-in games. They didn't have any NIT games tonight, so I don't know that they're doing full slates until the tournament. But if you have questions about FanDuel, feel free to drop those. And I always circle back around to watch the on-demand video. Any comments, questions, and stuff there, I get those answered. And I did provide timestamps last night because I know that's something I slack on. In a 3-hour show, it obviously needed those timestamps. So I'll make sure going on this entire week, we'll make sure those are on the comments for everything so you can click and easily get to the game that you want to hear about. After we do the game-by-game analysis, we will drop a 2 to 3 man core, as well as talk about any prize picks and betting opportunities. And then we'll get into a little bit of bracket talk here with our guest as well. I won't go over my bracket again. You guys know what that is, but we'll get our co-host here. And then popping him on now, it is the great editor and super Michigan State, Virginia hater. He comes with a lot of smart takes. I've been really excited to get him on the show, actually. Adam Young, been with FTN a while. Thanks, Adam, for joining us. I know it's late for you over there, but sounds like you're doing what I'm doing and kind of, let your regular day job know that, you might be a little just predisposed here or even sick, I guess, this week.
Yeah, that's what you got to do this time of year, but been a long time watcher of the show, first time guest. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get started here, I do want to talk to you about, a couple of things that happened tonight. You and I have been talking a lot and in the Discord about like what the committee got wrong. And one of the things that came up a lot, obviously FAU seeding, Mountain West, the way that they got seeded. And then Virginia's inclusion in the tournament. And they did no favors for themselves tonight, getting absolutely blasted by Colorado State. I can't say we're surprised at all, but did you take some joy in seeing them struggle the way they did?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you always want to see a team that's not deserving get knocked out early, but it doesn't seem to usually play out that way. Usually we've had teams in the past that were saying, oh, this team, no chance they should be here. And then they win a couple games. Sometimes they feel disrespected. They come out, fired up and win some games, but Virginia didn't really put up much of a fight. But for me, it was more to see the Mountain West get on the board. I know they've taken a lot of heat for past performances, but to have a dominant showing against Virginia right away gets them off to a good start in the tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good thing because we've seen Mountain West, obviously last year, they had San Diego State make a nice run, but they've faltered early and had some guys that, we thought would go further and unfortunately did not. And you're right. There's been teams that got in on the play-in line and ended up making runs. Syracuse did it a few times. ASU inexplicably did it. So yeah, I don't take a ton of joy in seeing them brick like that. I don't mind Tony Bennett, but I certainly don't think they did a good enough job with their talent pool, transfer portal. And I know the argument in the Discord there from Kutri, who's going to come on the show tomorrow. They've won ACC titles. They won a national title playing that way for sure. And they've been winning a lot of games, but clearly, with NIL the way it is and the way that the transfer portal is, I don't know that style of just taking role players is going to work so much nowadays. So they're going to have to change a little bit, but obviously we'll have to see them falter another year or two in a row before we maybe say that they have to completely change their style. But I am happy because I hate Virginia slates. We don't have to worry about them anymore. All right, we'll dive right in here. We have the play-in games. We have the NIT slate. It's a 9-gamer tomorrow. We had a 10-gamer today. Really nice performances from several players. Peyton Sandford had a huge game. I think he's probably not long for this world. The way he's playing, it seems like he's almost going to use the NIT as a NBA showcase. I had read an article earlier, saw an interview rather, that he was super hyped for this NIT tournament and that he was going to put on a show, and he did just that in that first game. Sad to lose Howard from the play-in game. Wagner, give it up to them, shorthanded as hell. They did a nice job shutting down a really good three-point shooting team, and they sped up. They're usually a slower-paced team. They were playing with so much pace in that first half. It was truly enjoyable to watch. But we also saw on the big stage, this sometimes happens with these 16 seeds. Maybe there's some nerves. Maybe there's, being under the spotlight, but we see a lot of turnovers, mistakes, bad shots. Towns ended up playing quite well in the second half, but in the first half, gosh, he was making so many ill-advised passes, and just overall the shooting for Howard was atrocious, especially for Marcus Dockery, who is typically a 40% plus three-point shooter. So that leads us into the first game on the slate that we're going to talk about, which is a play-in game amongst 16 seeds here. Montana State versus Grambling. Montana State is a 4-point favorite and the total of 135. So a similar setup as today's. Howard was about a 3.5 point favorite, and it was a lower total there. I obviously was much more confident in that Howard team. It didn't work out. Grambling won the SWAC via a very convincing win over Texas Southern. We're so used to seeing Texas Southern and Johnny Jones winning that tournament and getting in. That wasn't the case. They're going to be in here. And Montana State, under Matt Logie, 17-17 this season, a pretty, mediocre season there after not having Sprinkle, Ray Battle, Grado Sabor, a lot of guys who left the program, but they were able to beat their longtime rivals, Montana, in the title game, 85-70. They beat an upstart Sacramento State team and a very exciting Weber State team. Here they are against Grambling State. Ken Palm has it 69-67 in favor of Montana State. I know you had a chance to look at this game. What do you see amongst these two teams, and what are some of the players that you're looking at?
Montana State, I did watch that game, the Big Sky Championship. They actually struggled mightily in the first half. The second half, they just blew away Montana, and it was mostly their guard play. I mean, Robert Ford is pretty much the alpha of that team. His price is pretty decent, 7.6. They also have Eddie Turner. Those two guys like to they eat up most of the usage. They got a lot of production from John Olmstead. He's like a tree down low for them. I think Brandon Walker's another big guy they have. So they have some players. You never know what you're going to get with the SWAC. The SWAC's always a kind of out there conference, a lot of sloppy basketball. So I expect this game to kind of go back and forth a little bit. I think I trust Montana State a little bit more. That could be because I've actually seen them play. I haven't had the chance to see Grambling as much, but I trust the guard play in Montana State.
Yeah, definitely. And you'd mentioned Robert Ford. Like I said, they lost a lot of players from last year's roster. Robert Ford comes into it 8th most minutes percentage-wise in the conference, has a 24% usage rate, shot well over 41% from long range. Top 10 true shooting percentage in the conference, an elite defensive rebounding rate at 24% and a 19% assist rate, as well as a top 10 steals rate at 4.9%. He spent a couple of seasons at Idaho State. Now he's here at Montana State. Definitely a strong options. Looking at the initial projections, and I have a lot of cleaning up to do on the sheet. It's got some players who are actually out that I need to fix, but he was somebody who early on here when I first put it together was popping out quite a bit. And his price, like you had mentioned, it's not like it's super cheap by any means, but it's reasonable for what I expect him to do at 7.6K, playing about 35 to 36 minutes. With his rates, he projects well over 4.5x. So he's definitely going to be one of the guys that I'm looking at. Similar to today's Bryce Harris, who ended up, I marked him the posh play because I didn't expect him to be highly owned, but I whiffed that because he was 50%. Ended up having a nice game here. Robert Ford is one that I think could probably have some ownership based off of what we saw. Now, I was a little bit excited. I'm sidebar here for a second with today. We saw some chalky guys, right? Providence was an obvious stack, so they had a lot of ownership. But there were other options like Jason Edwards of North Texas that I was really high on. He ended up having a poor first half, finished with 27, I think, but 10% owned against LSU. To me, that was a huge advantage had it worked out. Either way, we saw Kashawn Pryor under 30%. Now, he also had a bad first half, but picked it up in the second. They ended up kind of, putting up 80 plus on UCF there. So there's going to be some opportunities here for us to get some really high leverage plays that are going to work out. And this is exactly how last year went when I was able to, get that washer and dryer money from Dylan Dessou. So I'm getting a little bit excited now because I'm seeing that in action already on Slate 1 with the playing games and NIT, that people are doing the groupthink thing. And with Providence, like, it worked out to a degree. They all mostly paid off. It was a high-scoring slate, but there were really good players that should have been higher owned and weren't. And perhaps Robert Ford is one of those guys that we can look at. But based off of what I saw with Harris, we'll probably see some ownership there with him. The rest of the starting five for Montana State includes Eddie Turner, Tyler Patterson, Brandon Walker, and Brian Garacki. Off the bench, we mostly see John Olmstead and Sam Legolat. They play about a 7 to 8 man rotation, so we are cool with that. We feel good about it. The Grambling side of things, it's kind of hard. SWAC and MEAC teams are really hard to peg at times. Like, they're super deep rotations ordinarily. Texas Southern, we're used to them being in it. They run a very Leonard Hamilton-esque rotation with 10, 11, 12 guys. Grambling, they don't do quite that degree. They're about a 9 to 10 man rotation. They have some solid pieces on this roster, one being Jonathan Aku, who did have high major experience, played back in the COVID days, all the way back in 2020 at Texas A&M, spent a season at Stephen F. Austin, and now he is playing at Grambling State, where he has become a truly horrific for opponents in the SWAC on our defensive glass and rim protection. He has a truly elite block rate over 5.5%, an offensive rebounding rate of 10.5%, and a combined rebounding rate of 28%. And he's shooting about 61% from the field. Near 7-footer, gets a ton of bunnies, putbacks, does almost all of his work on the glass in the low painted area. Jonathan Aku is somebody that I certainly want to look at here. He's no secret after what he did in their last game. He was like 3% owned on that smaller slate. Looking at it, he's pretty cheap at 5'6". There are going to be some foul issues. There usually are with a player 7 feet. He's playing a much better opponent in Montana State than maybe what they're used to seeing in their day-to-day. But still, Texas Southern is an upper-tier SWAC team, and I think we'll see similar production if he can get to about 30 minutes with those numbers. Looking at his game logs, there's a lot of unappealing, performances there at 5'6". I think we'll see him be rather low owned once again, but I do like him here after seeing the way he played at Texas Southern, and I think they'll lean on him heavily as long as he can stay on the floor. The other starting group for Grambling State includes Jordan Smith, Antoine Burnett, Contavious Dozer, who I really like, and Tremichael Moton. Off the bench in their last game, they used Jalen Johnson, Zahad Munford, and Mikhail Stevenson. We're talking about different names earlier today. Tyler Harris seems to be like 5 of those in college basketball at all times. Jalen Johnson is another name. And it's funny because with working with these projection sheets, when you put a certain name in it, it freaks out because it pulls that name from several different teams. So you'll see sometimes it'll have like the team abbreviations next to it. And Jalen Johnson was one that we'll have to do that on, even though he's really not that exciting of a play. Outside of Aku, again, I'm going to stick with the starters here for Grambling. I don't want to get into this situation like I did today where I ran like a 2 or 3 man stack from that game. It ended up okay. Doherty could have done a lot better. Shockingly, he was like 9% owned today, even though he was only 5'2". A lot of that had to do with the fact that Providence had no Devin Carter, no subs to speak of, so everybody went that direction instead. So there was a less ownership there didn't work out with Dockery, but I think we'll have some opportunities at some leverage in this game. But I don't want to get into a situation where I'm taking 4 guys from it and it ends up being 52-50 or something like that. Kentavious Dozier is interesting. He has a 25% usage rate and a 28% shot rate, drawing almost 5 fouls per 40. Tremichael Moton has a 25% shot rate, while Jordan Smith has a 21% usage rate. So those are the primary options to look at on the Grambling side. Moton's a little bit spendy for me at 7-7. Same with Smith. I love the Dozier play at 5-8. I think he'll be a little bit lower owned, just like Dockery was today. Takes a high number of shots. His peripherals can be spotty. He wasn't particularly great against Texas Southern. He didn't take as many shots either. It was the Aku show. But you see the minutes are there consistently, and at 5.8K, I see there is some upside here going up against this Montana State side. So taking some cheapies from this game that I like and possibly rolling with Ford there, who may be a popular play. All right, getting into the NIT portion here, St. Joe's versus Seton Hall. It is a 146.5 total. Seton Hall 7.5 point favorites. The cool thing here, we're seeing, in the NIT, we're seeing teams, obviously, Chris Beard and Ole Miss decline, Rick Pitino and St. John's decline. But Holloway asked his guys, if they wanted to play. I guess everybody unanimously said yes. I was a little bit worried about today's slate with the way Jerome Tang talked about playing some of the younger guys. Some of these players are probably going to opt out, if they're going to the NBA draft or they're just done hitting the portal. So it's still something to pay attention to and be nervous about. It wasn't a big deal today. I don't foresee that being a big issue with Seton Hall. I think everybody would play there. I don't know if people know this, but you do a lot of writing and covering of New Jersey sports. That's your area. You know it well, a lot of talent. So Seton Hall is a team that you see a lot of, a lot about them, and you can, pretty much break down their games in your sleep. So why don't you start us off here and talk about this one?
Yeah, I mean, you've talked about it before. Just in the NIT, you want to look at how teams' motivation. Sometimes you get teams that kind of just quit. I don't think Seton Hall's the type of team that will quit. I don't think their coach is the type of coach that would allow his players to quit. So certainly they have motivation to go all the way and win this tournament. So I'd expect the players to respond. Their offense just starts with Kadari Richmond. He's always an option on every slate. I usually don't get to him just because his price is typically up there. I jotted down some notes about this game. 8-7, that's kind of around where Richmond has been throughout the season. It's one of those where if you're going to go stars and scrubs, I could see going there simply because of his usage. But, he's the guy who runs the show. The rest of the team, I don't really like the prices as much. And Davis is up there at 8-1. Bediako, I mean, we've had frustration with him in the past in the Discord with fouls. He's at 6-1. You never know what you're going to get out of him. Dawes and Wusu, 6-1 and 5-8. Just kind of ancillary pieces on the team. So for me, it's really, if you're going to pay up for Richmond, he's the type of guy who can give you 40, but the rest of the guys I'm not too excited about.
Yeah, and honestly, like Richmond, when he was cheaper, everybody was using him. He's been kind of so expensive now. It's been a take it or leave it situation. The player that I've been using a lot for them the last month or two is Dre Davis, but now it's like, damn, he's 8-1. That's a really expensive price for him. If I'm going to pay that, I might as well just find the 600 to go to Kadari. So I think you're right. It's kind of tough to feel good about any of those pieces there just because of the prices. Or if you're dropping down to Dawes, who's primarily just a scorer, or Adewusu, who has trouble and difficulty finding any kind of buckets to fall down at all. You put those two together into one player, you'd have something. But I agree, Seton Hall's a little bit tough here. Easier to look at. The thing is, though, St. Joseph's is a fantasy-friendly group, so somebody's going to end up optimal out of that or semi-optimal out of that game on the Seton Hall side, but very much disinterested in them as well. St. Joe's side, most players are cheap here. Outside of Eric Reynolds, who's right around 7-9, highest usage player on the team. There was some talk about the forward Rasheer Fleming opting out here. He's getting some NBA draft talk. A lot of upside. Scouts seem to like him. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. He is priced at 7.5. I'm really nervous about him anyways. Christ Esendako ends up not starting because of Fleming, but there are foul issues that happen for both of those guys. And really the only player that I ever have interest in lately on this team is Xavier Brown, the freshman sensation, but he's priced at 6.5, and he had a horrible performance in their conference tournament where he completely disappeared in the second half. He does project as the best for the team right now, but I'm certainly going to tread carefully when it comes to Xavier Brown. There is a slight discount for Lynn Greer at 5'9" as well, but the Seton Hall team, they're aggressive, they're opportunistic. I don't know if St. Joseph's going to have the juice here to pan out. So I'm going to be mostly down on this game for sure, even though the total seems a little bit higher there at almost 150. All right, next game on the slate, SMU versus Indiana State, a total of 157.5, nearly 160, highest on the slate. The Sycamores are 7-point favorites over the Stangs. That, seems to me, not that I'm some big SMU super fan, but that seems a little bit high. I know it's a road game, but I feel like this one is going to be a great opportunity for Indiana State to play mad. They obviously got snubbed. The committee admitted that they were one of the first 4 out next to Seton Hall. Go figure, and Pittsburgh, which didn't make a lot of sense to me, and Oklahoma, which I was kind of lukewarm on. Clearly, they could have probably done a better performance than Virginia tonight. We won't take too many shots at them, but this Indiana State team, they're going to be playing, looking to make a run here in the NIT and try to prove them wrong. You see these teams who go into the NIT and actually want to play, and they get that snub, and they use it as motivation, and they go on these runs. And a lot of people will do the it's NIT, who cares? It's a secondary tournament. Nobody pays attention to it. But there is something in merit about, winning tournament games, regardless of NIT or not, using that as a way to build your program. It shows potential recruits and transfers that they're going to play meaningful basketball in March, regardless if it's the NIT or not, and that the coach actually cares enough to continue to play basketball into March. And, winning a trophy, whether it's the NIT or not, is still a pretty fun thing. And a lot of times these NIT teams, they use it as a catapult to get themselves into the big dance the following year and get some, momentum. I do feel like it's a little bit high, even though Indiana State's at home. They're a very efficient team. They have a fantastic overall roster, one of the most efficient 2-point offenses. They're a top 10 3-point shooting team, top 20 offense, and they play at a tempo in the 40s. They, of course, have Robbie Avila, who everybody has affectionately begun calling Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He has fantastic rates across the board. He's one of those, Derek Walker-esque bigs that I love. Plays that quarterback role. He can take jumpers. He can put it on the deck. He can bang down low. He can hit threes. He involves his teammates. There's just a lot of different things that Robbie Avila can do. Now, he has a myriad of options around him. They had that really close game against Drake, 84-80, and you saw it was just an absolute war. Jason Kent can be a big-time scorer. We see Isaiah Swope. He's very productive. The nice thing about Indiana State is that they run their starters in a Jim Boeheim-esque type of situation where they're all going to play 30-plus. You'll get a little bit of bench pieces from Xavier Bludson, who's been around for a long time. But for the most part, Ryan Conwell, Julian Larry, Jason Kent, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Isaiah Swope are going to play the entire game, barring any foul trouble. But you look at, 3-4 fouls for a lot of their starters in that game, they still played 35-plus minutes. So two foul participation for Indiana State's coach, who is Josh Schertz, is actually quite high. So we don't have to necessarily worry about that as much. On the SMU side, they do have a better than people realize defense. They're an elite offensive rebounding team. They don't particularly shoot the ball all that well. They like banging down low. They like to make games ugly. They do have a ton of players on their team like Chucky Harris, like Zierich Phelps, guys that like to drive to the basket. They get a very high percentage of their shots blocked, and they do turn it over a lot. That's a main reason why they were unable to make any noise in the American Conference tournament, and they lost very early to Tempo, who made a run there. It's the usual suspects. We had SMU on the slate. Seemed like 2 or 3 times a week there for a while. Phelps is your primary guy, has the highest usage and shot rate on the team. Chucky Harris is their primary 3-point shooter. And then you have Samuel Williamson with elite block, steal, and rebounding rates. Tyreek Smith has fantastic overall rates as well, but it's pretty hard for me to get too excited about him. He's typically been priced up a little bit too high to really ever use as a secondary piece. At 6'4", I guess we can get there, but I foresee him going into a hostile territory and ending up just getting into foul trouble. And even when he doesn't, he's pretty well capped at about 18 to 20 minutes. So that price just isn't going to be in the cards for me. It's mainly going to be any of the top 3, which is Williamson, Phelps, or Chucky Harris. Certainly not prioritizing them over the Sycamores. Even though I think this game will be closer and SMU covers, I think most of the fantasy goodness does come from the Sycamore side. We can easily play Avila at 8-1. Conwell at 8-3 is fine as well. Really like the Larry play at 6-3, and at 6-8 we have Kent. 2 or 3 Indiana State plays I think is a fantastic idea. We like mini stacking. We like full stacking. It's a profitable move in CBB and has been for a long time. People are starting to figure that out, and I think the Sycamores will probably be somewhat of a popular option here because when you look at the NIT, motivation can be a factor. I don't think they'll have any problem getting up for this game. Do you have any additional takes or thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, you said it. I think watching Virginia tonight, I'm assuming Indiana State saw what happened or at least saw the score at the end. Indiana State's going to come into this game mad, but after watching Virginia tonight, they might be even extra mad, saying, we got left out for this team that just laid an egg. Now we're up. Now we really have to show the committee, that we should have been in. And they're at home. And SMU, you mentioned, we've seen them many times. I don't think SMU wins this game. I think Indiana State's going to come in angry. There's a lot of options. Like you said, you could stack this game up. It's probably going to be very fantasy friendly. And I actually like kind of mini stacking Indiana State and maybe Montana State together, almost like a turbo slate where you have 2 games, something like that. I'm at least interested in.
Yeah, definitely. All right, moving on to the next game here. We have Loyola versus Bradley. It is a spread of 4.5 in favor of Bradley, total of 138. This Loyola team annoys the hell out of me, and it's not the Sister Jean stuff that a lot of people get annoyed about. It's the fact that Drew Valentine acts like he's a much better coach than he actually is, or that he's some sort of, mastermind. A lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm such a huge Dame Adelkuhn fan that I thought he should have been playing, 30 plus minutes. A lot of talk comes out that he couldn't handle, the upper tier competition in the A10, but to me, that was a little bit of BS because in his spurts of playing 10 to 15 minutes, he just absolutely dominated time and time again. And when you look at the rates on this team, Adelkuhn has some of the best. 28.5% shot rate, which is highest on the team, 28.5% usage rate, which even ahead of Philip Alston, and he has a combined rebounding rate of 31% as well, a block rate of 6.5%, and he's drawing 5.5 fouls per 40. However, he has a 7.2 fouls called per 40 rate, and a lot of the times when he does come in, those foul issues happen. He hasn't been cheap enough. Every time Loyola's been on the slate, and it's been about 3 or 4 times, it's not many. Was very stubborn back in November when they played FAU. He didn't start at 6'9". I really wanted him. He ended up playing like 10 minutes. He put up damn near 20 fantasy points, and I remember being so mad about that. And it was just the case all year long with him. Priced at 7.3, it's going to be difficult. If you're running multiple lineups, I want to have some Adelkuhn. He's going to be 1%. You look at even 23 minutes only against St. Bonaventures. They did lose that game. 12 points, 10 rebounds, had 2 blocks of steal, absolutely filled it up. The week before that against LaSalle in only 19 minutes, 12 points, 10 rebounds, 2 assists, 28 and 34 fantasy points. Dame Adelkuhn is an absolute sneak. Just wish they would have priced him cheaper. 7.3 it's a really tough price for me to sit here and recommend. Not going to use him in my main lineup, but I certainly will have exposure. When it comes to the rest of the Ramblers, I don't have a ton of excitement for them. Philip Alston has been solid recently. They do run through a lot of different players in their front court and on the wing. Braden Norris and Des Watson make up their backcourt. Those two play a ton. And then you'll see Jalen Quinn, Miles Rubin, Patrick Mwamba, those guys all cycling through. Just not a very excellent DFS style team. They are very frustrating the times that they have been on the slate. And I wasn't mad that they didn't make the tournament just because I didn't want to have to deal with them. And price wise, none of them, really stick out as majorly appealing options because of that. Watson at 6'9" has some merit, but I think where I'm going to lean here is on the Bradley side, where there are some very defined pecking orders going on and some reasonable prices that we can actually pay. Malevi Leon's for Bradley. He has major upside. Drake, he absolutely got shut down against Drake when they lost back on March 9th. Played 37 minutes and had a really strong start in the first half, but did almost nothing in the second half. Big shout out to Drake for shutting him down. His 3 prior games, he eclipsed 31 fantasy points with ease. He is also one of those type of quarterbacking bigs that can do it from a myriad of ways: hit shots, knock down threes, rack up assists, grab rebounds. So I do like Leon 7-6. It's a little bit high, but he's definitely going to be able to do some things that we're used to seeing him do against this Loyola team that he didn't end up doing against Drake. This team does have a couple of options on it that are interesting outside of Leon's, and players that we have been talking about in the past that have let us down, such as Duke Dean, who seems a little bit expensive at 6'8" for a shooter, primary a shooter. Connor Hickman at 6'7", who does have a lot of interest, or I have a lot of interest in him, just because he does fill up the stat sheet and contributes a little bit more than what we see from Dean. And then also you have at 7'1" Darius Hannah, the front court mate there, has upside, mostly a GPP look, but this Bradley team has a very appealing group here, and we could maybe have a MVC stack in our lineups here today for this slate. I know Dean has been a nemesis to you. Are you going back to him, and who else do you like in this one?
No, I was going to say, for my takeaways, I'm just not falling for Dean this time. I think Dean was 6'1" the first time I played him, and I was talking him up, and I think he ended up with maybe 21 points or something, but yeah, for the majority of the game, he was just non-existent. He was passive. So I did go back to him the next slate. I think it's just a slight price increase. It was definitely a Missouri Valley tournament game, I think. And he was a little better, but yeah, I'm not falling for it. His price went up. Now he's at 6'8". Hickman, like you said, he does a little bit more. He's not just relying on the scoring, but again, I don't know if I'll get there. I'm kind of more interested in the Indiana State guys, and like we talked about the Montana State guys, and I'm sure a couple other teams that we'll get to later. But yeah, Loyola, I'm not really interested either. And on a side note, how long has Norris been there? My gosh,
man,
is he 6th year?
It's been a long. Let's check, because it's been a long time. I'm sure before the COVID season. So I thought he used his COVID year last year. Let's see.
Sister Jean, under 100 years
old.
old.
He was at Oakland. I was gonna say, I remember him at another program. So he's at Oakland in 2019. So he's been playing college basketball since 2019.
That's at least 5 years, 5-6 years.
Yeah,
not quite Seth Towns, but
no. At Oakland, his freshman season at Oakland, he was like the most ridiculous 3-point shooter, just chucked at will, and he made like damn near 50%. But yeah, it's crazy that he's still kicking, still around
somehow.
Mr. Gene has that fountain of youth, I guess. All right, on the next game here, we have UNLV versus Princeton. Princeton, a 3-point favorite, total of 139. Princeton, they, the Ivy League tournament didn't have my Harvard guys in it. They weren't good enough, but Brown kind of shocked them in the world, I guess. I like that Brown team. It wasn't that shocking to me with how hot they had been playing, but this Princeton team, 24-4, they don't feel losses too often. So that was a rough one there not to get them in the tournament, especially after the way that they played last year, obviously with Ryan Langborg, who's now playing for your Northwestern squad and winning a couple of tournament games there, making the Sweet 16. Looked like they were going to build on that. They have a solid squad. You're very familiar with Princeton, I know. Break this one down for us.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I almost decided to go to this game just because I'm such a Mountain West guy. And I was thinking, UNLV's coming to Princeton for an NIT game. I'm not going, but I have actually never been to Princeton or their campus or their gym, but I'm sure it's an electric atmosphere there. I think the guy who stands out the most to me is Xavier Lee, just because his price is so low. He's down at 5'2". It's a guy who averages like over 30 fantasy points a game. They have Caden Pierce, who's the alpha of the team. He's all the way up at 8K, so I don't know if I'll get there. UNLV can be a tough team. I think, like we've talked about many times, that the Mountain West is underrated. I think the physicality UNLV might frustrate Princeton a little bit. They're more of a finesse team, but those are the two players that stand out for me, at least on the Princeton side.
Yeah, and UNLV, they've got a lot of high variance players. They do play a more physical side. They're going to be able to, I think, control the glass. They'll do some of those things that they're good at with their physicality. But I worry about their offense being able, if Princeton gets hot, being able to keep up there. The Boone brothers, we know they foul a lot. Keelan can score with the best of them. He's almost 8K though. That's pretty a hard price for me to pay. Caleb Boone, we know the upside is there when he's not fouling. Luis Rodriguez, he's been around. Another player, used to be in the SEC. He's been around for a long time. He just doesn't have any upside. He never has. The price is usually appealing on him. It's only 6'2", but that just hasn't been there. The main player for UNLV that I like is Denon Thomas, sitting there at 7K. He's the one that, they're going to have to rely on heavily here. And you look at his last 5 or 6 games, what he's been able to do, playing majority of the game, and in those matchups there against SDSU, Nevada, some of the harder teams they had to play to end their season, he was absolute fire in all of those. Peripherals may be a little bit spotty there, but it's mainly because he had to take on so much of the scoring role. He just was doing it all. 21 shot attempts against SDSU in a close loss. He nearly put the team on his back and completed that win. 29 actual points for 38 fantasy points. I love him in this spot here against Princeton. Like just going to be a guy that has a 40% usage rate in this game and takes another 15 plus shots with ease. So I'm really
He's one of my favorites. Just watching. Yeah. I'm sure you've watched him, but anybody who hasn't watched UNLV, you're in for a treat if you watch this game. But for a freshman, the poise that he showed, hitting that game-tying shot against San Diego State in the tournament, they probably should have won that game. They're up 4 points in overtime with like a minute and a half. And he actually got a really good look that I think could have won it. The buzzer came up a little short, but his future is bright.
Oh, for sure. Because efficiency wise, he's, what you would expect from most, there's some sicko freshmen out there, but 34% from long range, true shooting percentage is pretty low. There's a lot of, and he has a very high assist rate because starting out, he was more of a facilitator, and he's kind of developed over the course of the season into this, mega scorer. Depending on what they're able to do in the portal in the offseason, what they, assuming they don't lose him or anything and bring him some help. Yeah, I think he's going to be phenomenal next year and much more of an efficient scorer. But he has a little bit of Cam Thomas to him with some of his scoring. Plays 87.6% of the available minutes. He and Luis Rodriguez play most of the game. They cycle through all those other options there. But yeah, Thomas definitely will be up for this one. You mentioned on the Princeton side just how cheap Xavier Lee is at 5'2". Pretty rock solid, like 4X at that price. I think he'll be somewhat popular. Although I thought Dockery would be a little popular today. Had we not had Devin Carter out and, Rich Barron out and all, like Providence on the morphine drip with like 5 people, we probably would have seen a lot more ownership on Dockery. And he didn't play that bad, really. Put up 19.5 at 5'2". Foresee a similar, floor for Xavier Lee there, right around 20. Has shown upside for 30 plus. Prior to their loss against Brown, he had put up 32 plus fantasy points in 3 of his prior 4. So I'm certainly looking at Lee as well. That just seems like a pretty big no-brainer type of play here. Like I said,
right?
I would think so. But like I said, I thought Dockery would be too.
They scroll down the list and they get to 5'2" and they see 33 points, fantasy points per game. True. He's probably going to pop in all the projection systems. The trains might have him. People like that.
Yeah, the dreaded trains. Yeah, for sure. It would seem like that would be something that we would see there. And I like maybe pairing another player from Princeton with him just to maybe get a little bit of leverage there. If people are just going to play the one and move on, there's potential for a 2 or 3 player stack here. Looking at the rates there also for Lee, he is clearly underpriced. 29% shot rate, 28.8% usage rate, a 25% assist rate, and he's drawing over 5 fouls per 40, shooting about 36% from long range. So it makes very, very little sense for him to be that price. Caden Pierce also has very elite overall rates, the 15th best defensive rebounding rate. He was there for their run last year as a freshman. He showed in the tournament, he kind of grew up quickly and became like their enforcer. He's operated in that role this year, and he's been just a phenomenal player. He had against Penn to end their regular season 32 points, 9 rebounds, 4 assists, 40% usage rate. His usage rate has been just astronomically high over the last month and a half of the season. That's one that I'm pretty intrigued by, just knowing he's 8K. People are going to take Lee. They're probably not going to want to pay that for Pierce. They instead go to Indiana State, play Vila. There's a couple of other options that they go up to Kadari Richmond, Mogbo for San Francisco. We know how great he can be. So I think that's a pretty sneaky-esque type play there at 8K for Pierce too. And those would be the 2 main guys. The rest of Princeton guys, they have merits, but 6'7" for a loco. Seems like he's kind of fallen to 3rd or 4th in the pecking order. Peters isn't that interesting even at 4'8". So I'm just mainly going to be looking at Lee and Pierce. All right, moving on. This is a great show to have you on because there's a lot of teams on here you either know a lot about or you just like them and you use them all the time. And this next game is
got all the Jersey teams: Princeton,
yeah.
Seton Hall. I mean, today we had Wagner, not really Jersey, but a couple Jersey guys, guy from Bergen Catholic, and a player who was at Monmouth, Ron Allen. So a lot of connections.
Yeah, definitely. And then we get into this one, the Appy State versus Wake Forest game. And this is a Wake Forest team that you're very familiar with. You're always hyping them every time they were at home. One of those teams that you just, the Wake Forest stack, it works. They're 6.5 point favorites, total of 146. Appy State, they won their regular season conference, even though James Madison had, lost 3-4 games, something like that. They had gotten them during the regular season, end up dropping out in a close one to Arkansas State after they had to survive overtime against Georgia Southern. Just a complete fail there for Appy State. Now they're going to be playing here in the NIT in a hostile environment. The nice thing about Wake Forest is you don't have to worry about their effort. They're going to definitely play this NIT to win, but can't help but think the players are going to be disappointed here. It's yet another wasted season for a really good coach in Steve Forbes, who works the portal as good as anyone. He develops talent. He recruits. He's competitive every year. They just don't seem to close the deal. The amount of close games they lose under Steve Forbes, I haven't checked to get the exact number, but man, the last 2 seasons at least, they've lost a ton of winnable games where they would have, picked up 3 or 4 extra wins in each of those seasons. They would have definitely been a tournament team. This wouldn't have been the year for it because of all the bid stealers and everything, but it's definitely disappointing. I don't think that they lay an egg here, though. That's something I've been hearing a lot of people talk about here. Oh, Appy State will be motivated. They'll want to play hard. Wake Forest will just be there, show up, and get beat and leave. I don't think that's going to be the case, especially with Hunter Salas, who I've also heard rumors of him because he's a top 100 draft prospect, which what does that even mean these days? Possibly opting out. I don't think that'll be the case. And I think this roster looks very, very good here against this Appy State team at home. A mini Wake Forest stack, perhaps that's been a go-to move for you when Wake Forest is on the slate at home. They do lose Damari Monsanto, who decided to enter the portal. He's been around Forbes for years, dating back to their previous stop together, ETSU. It was very strange. He had the knee issue, but then he was fine. Forbes didn't play him. I don't know if they had a falling out or what, but he's gone, won't be there. That makes the Wake Forest bench even further lean. They run their starters of Salas, Carr, Reed, Hildreth, and Boopy Miller. And then off the bench, we've just been seeing a lot of Parker Friedrichsen and then a little bit of Matthew Marsh. So I like this team. I know you're probably going to like this team as well. 6K for Boopy. That to me is a pretty big lock. You're running a balanced build. It fits well. You need a last guy in type when you're doing stars and scrubs. That fits well. He has fantastic overall rates. He's got a relatively unappealing last 4 games. So the masses, more casual players might gloss over Miller without realizing just how good he is. I really like that play at 6K. Salas 2K more. Obviously comes with more upside, but to me, that 2K discount is certainly worth it. Huge fan of Miller here. I always like Hildreth. I think Efton Reed could have a nice game here against the Appy State front court. Appalachian State's team, they have Donovan Gregory. They've gone through some changes, but Donovan Gregory, speaking of players who have been around, since the Stone Age, it just seems to me like he's been on this Appalachian State team for a long time. And he did come out and he was recruited in 2019. His freshman season was the COVID year. So it just tells you, yes, he's in his 5th season and has been there for a long time. And he's gone through and been the highest usage alpha on this team. He's been a role player. He's played every single different role for this team. Still their main leader and not the alpha, but just a guy that they look to a lot. He's a definite interesting piece at 6.6K, somebody that I think might get overlooked. You also have Butler transfer Miles Tate, who has shown flashes throughout the season. You saw against Marshall, he hung 43. That was recently. A lot of downside, not a ton of peripherals consistently. He does have a decent assist rate. His minutes are somewhat erratic in that he plays low 20s majority of the time, but you do see some spikes. One of the main issues is that he just has a very high turnover rate and he's not able to take care of the ball as well. And they look to other facilitators, but that price for him is 5.5K and is somewhat intriguing there, assuming that none of their guys will sit out, which I don't think will be the case. Wake Forest well. You stack them a lot. I think you target against them quite a bit as well. What are some of the priority plays in this one for you?
Well, first of all, I think you said they're going to be motivated. I think they're the betting favorite to actually win the NIT. I could be wrong, but I actually checked the odds beforehand because I was interested in betting Ohio State. I think Ohio State has a good chance to win the NIT, and I think they were second behind Wake Forest. So the Vegas seems to think that Wake Forest will be engaged in this game. I always love targeting them at home, like you said. Salas is, like you said, there's some upside there. 8K. I tend to play Salas in these Wake Forest stacks just because I like to play the guy with the highest usage. But you can mix and match. Sometimes I'll do Miller and Hildreth together with a forward. Sometimes I'll do Salas and Miller with the other forward. I just like to mix and match the pieces because the starters just get so much run. But it all starts with Salas usage-wise. So if you want the usage, go with Salas and then maybe go with Miller because of the discount. And then you could mix and match between Carr and Reed. Reed's really the better option. It's just a matter of if he's going to stay out of foul trouble. I think, again, I don't know as much about Appalachian State as you, but do they have anybody who will put him in danger of getting those 2 quick fouls that we see quite often? Or is this one of those games where he might be free from the foul trouble?
I think he'll be pretty solid. The primary center for Appy State is CJ Huntley. He's near 7 feet, but he's not a big, not a big fouler himself, but he also doesn't draw a lot. Donovan Gregory is a relentless attacker at the rim. He does draw a fair amount, but I think defensively on the perimeter, Wake Forest can at least, give some, put up a wall a bit before he gets to Reed and draws any fouls there. I think he should be relatively safe and free and clear here, especially at home from a bad whistle and any potential early 2 fouls. But it's on him too, right? Like if he's going up for blocks, he needs to be smart how he does it. Doesn't need to reach doing these things that he does sometimes.
Yeah, I could see going Miller, Hildreth, Reed just to save a little bit because Salas is up there at 8K. When I do stack, sometimes I like that. Just leave the high usage guy out in case he busts and then play the secondary pieces. But if Reed's going to most likely be safe from foul trouble, and of course we say most likely, he could get 2 fouls in 30 seconds. But that might be my priority. If I'm going to stack this game, I think Miller, Hildreth, Reed. That would be the 3-man. If you're just going to go with 2, maybe Miller and Reed. I like that.
Yeah, I like that. This slate's like today's slate. It really obviously, Esquero was not priced correctly still. We had all the Providence guys. Like that just made sense with all the value to kind of cram in whatever payups you could get. This one has a lot of mid-range guys, and even at the 8K range, you can fit 2 or 3 of those without really punting a ton. And Reed's price at, anytime he's under 7K and Miller down there at 6K just fits a really, kind of a priority balance type of lineup. So I like that and kind of like Tate on the other side, or like I said, Gregory. All right, next one here, we're going to talk about the other play-in game, the last one, Boise State, another Mountain West team versus Colorado. The Buffs are 2.5-point favorites and the total's a 140, a 141. These are 2 teams quite well. Colorado because they're always on those dreaded Thursday slates, and of course Mountain West because you said you watch a lot of Mountain West. You felt Mountain West got shafted. Perhaps this was a spot they did. There was a lot of talk about Colorado once they lost the Pac-12 tournament championship to Oregon of maybe being out. They ended up getting in, but clearly by the skin of their teeth as they're in the play-in game. Cody Williams getting healthy at the right time for Colorado. KJ Simpson, one of those elite guards. Boise State's a physical team. They play well. Seems like a game that has potential overtime upside. Should be close. But prices are, firm on these groups. And, they both have a lot of downside because of a maybe lower scoring game. But also consistency has been an issue for both of these teams this season. Where are you looking here?
You said it. I mean, Boise State's a tough defensive team. I don't know if they'll be able to limit Colorado. I mean, Colorado's a very, very, very good offensive team. This is at a neutral site. It's not in Boise. KJ Simpson's under 9K. He's kind of been up in the 9.3, even 9.5 range. KJ Simpson's a player who's actually never let me down. I don't know if I'll play him tomorrow, but I just felt like I'd throw that in with all the landmines that we've experienced this year all the players that we've hashtagged never fill in the blank. KJ Simpson's been good to me. So he at least is on my radar at 8.88. And De Silva as well. De Silva's really stepped it up the last couple of weeks. He had a blow-up game. I forget who he was against, but he's another scoring threat. The thing about De Silva is he can stretch and play on the perimeter a little bit. Boise's interior defense can be tough at times. I don't really like targeting them, but De Silva's somebody who can, bring the big guys out. So those are the two targets from Colorado. I don't know if you wanted to get into Boise, but I didn't really have much interest there. I know Dagan Hart, he's a little expensive, a little downside, like you said, if it's going to be a lower scoring game. Max Rice was the player who stood out the most to me at 5'9". If he's making those difficult shots, those last second prayers that he tends to make at the end of shot clocks, he can really fill it up quickly. But I'd rather go cheap because with the lower scoring potential to this game, I'd rather just take the cheapies because there's so many other good options elsewhere.
Yeah, this is one that I feel like it's going to be, like I said, be close. Maybe there's some overtime potential, but that overtime could be like in the 50s, in the 60s. It's definitely not that of appealing of game. And lately, the last month of the season, the Colorado games, we're playing Simpson. He's working out for us, but those Colorado values, just torturing us. O'Brien's one of those guys that is on your hashtag never again.
Just don't play O'Brien.
Yeah, and it's been tough really to, Lampkin, who has been cheap without Cody Williams, he was kind of hit or miss. There's not a lot of exciting options here. So Simpson really is the guy that, if you're playing somebody you want to get to. De Silva is cheap, but I don't have a lot of trust with him. Really want to use Cody Williams. He's so cheap. Future NBA prospect. He was one of the players that I highlighted in the, to watch for. Not going to be 100% for this one. Unfortunately, the ankle issue cost him a lot of time, at the end of January into now. Probably seeing him play mid-20s minutes, but the price is right. And he's hitting shots. Not a big-time three-point shooter, but he's a decent jump shooter, can hit that mid-range game. He's been rebounding better over the last couple of games. The Oregon game especially, he was pretty paramount there. They did end up faltering, but he was a big reason why they were in it. So perhaps Cody Williams can work his way in as a main team type of option there at 5'1". I don't know that a lot of people will use him, so it's kind of a sneakier value. And I'm certainly not going to, plant my flag in the sand and say I'm all in on Cody, but I definitely don't want to miss out when we get a healthier Cody Williams game, because prior to the injury, he was putting up 30-plus fantasy points with relatively ease, and it was easy to see why NBA scouts were so excited about him. So that's the one player I do want to look out for. On the Boise State side, they've been, not a team that I find myself ever on those late-night Mountain West slates feeling like, I faded, Omar Stanley, I'm dead. He's had some big games here. It's crazy that, he goes from being a, just a lowly role player for St. John's to being this big time stud forward for Boise State. Definitely going to be involved in a physical front court matchup with Eddie Lampkin. One of those guys is clearly headed for foul trouble. I'd rather just stay away from that entirely. We've been dealing with, jinx wise, I'm very superstitious. That a lot of us are. I made the mistake like a month and a half, 2 months ago, being like, hey, we really haven't had a lot of foul trouble this season with our guys. And of course, ever since then, we're just getting shot in the ass with all this foul issue. So if I can help it and not go into a situation where I know there's going to be fouls on one or the other side, I'm going to stay away. The Rice price is interesting at 5'9", as you highlighted. He's going to have to make shots. He gets a lot of volume, but if he's not making shots, then that 5'9" price won't matter because he'll just brick. We saw him, against Air Force, an easier opponent, shot 1 of 7 from downtown. He literally put up 5 fantasy points against them. Tougher outing, played 33 minutes against San Diego State, less than 15 fantasy points. That's a lot of fit bidding there. Just makes me nervous. There are a lot of options between 5 and 6K that we can look to that we've already talked about. So Rice is not really on my list, but I do recognize that price, and they're going to need him for sure. They got the transfer from UC San Diego, Roddy Anderson, who I expected a lot more from this year. Take him some time to really get used to the upper tier competition. And I don't know that he's still there yet. He has been taking more shots lately, but it does seem like Rice is going to continue to get more minutes, more shots than Anderson, at least for the rest of this season, as long as they're back around. So because of that, Anderson can't be used, and Rice is going to continue to play 35+ minutes. Agbo is a pretty streaky 3-point shooter, but when he's on, he's deadly, but I'm not paying 6.6 for him. Last year and the year before, we got really used to paying 5.5, 5.6, 5.7 for him. So I just can't be paying $7K for him, because if he's not making shots, he's not going to make value. All right, moving on to the next one here. We have San Fran versus Cincinnati. Total of 142.5. The Bearcats are 5.5-point favorites. The Bearcats stack a couple of weeks ago really panned out for us well. I mean, we absolutely detonated. That was against West Virginia to close out the season. Johnny Newman had a good game for us. Day Thomas had a nice game. Of course, everybody and their mom was using Dan Skillings. Then we followed that up with another game against West Virginia, and it was chaos and busts, and it didn't work quite as well. But Day Thomas really emerged from that 3-4 game stretch being a rock solid performer, and somebody that I like quite a bit, and I'm excited to see him in the future as well. Coming into the game, Cincinnati's prices are still relatively cheap compared to what their rotation is going to be with their health and the actual alphas on this team, like Dan Skillings at 7.1. I think at this point he should be considered more of an 8K plus type of player. He took 23 shots in that 20-point decimation of Kansas. Granted, I know they didn't have McCullough. Big news there is he's not going to play in the tournament. 14 shot attempts against Baylor in what ended up being a relatively close loss. They had control of that game for a long time, but they just gassed out at the end. I love Skillings. He reminds me so much of Terry Eason with the way that he can fill it up so quickly. He can hit threes. He racks up stocks. He can rebound, drops a little bit of dimes, and he can hit from all three levels as a scorer. So I'm a big Skillings guy here. Will we be able to use him with some of those earlier options for Indiana State? Paying for Ford on Montana State, perhaps maybe a little bit of Princeton, maybe not. But I definitely want exposure to Dan Skillings, and he's a type of player that I think does end up relatively popular just because people know what they're going to get with him. There's been a lot of uncertainty lately in the conference tournament week, especially. There was no such thing as a safe play, but Skillings does represent one of the safer options to me. Day Thomas's price got a little bit out of whack after he just blew up against West Virginia, 35 plus in back-to-back games. He eclipsed 7K, became almost 8K. Now he's back down to a relatively cheap price at 6.5. I'm interested in his matchup with the San Francisco guards. I think he has a chance to get back and put up a 30 plus here. Secondary option for sure, but I definitely like Day. And then you're talking about still cheap prices for guard forward eligible Johnny Newman, who I know is technically not a good player. We try not to use players like this. He had the secondary brick against West Virginia. He just fouled out. He got fouls and hurt us bad. The first game against West Virginia, he came through at 10% or less, put up 31. He did it again against Kansas with another 31. He's playing some of the best basketball of his time here at Cincinnati. He's been around the block a little bit. I do still like him at that low 6K range. Just DK refuses to move his price up. It's nice that he has that guard forward eligibility because we can move him around where we need to, wherever the lineup dictates. And I do think he is in a nice spot here against San Francisco, where he's going to have some of their secondary defenders on him. He won't have to deal with, guys like Mogbo and some of their better defenders. Stemus Lukosius is 6'5", guard forward eligibility as well. He put up that just silly 44 against West Virginia the second time they played them. I'm usually not looking to Stemus, but he is putting up a decent number, but he's playing a ton of minutes, 37 plus minutes pretty much. So you're going to get a guy who's just not going to leave the court. Victor Larkin remains super banged up. They tried to use him against Baylor. The ankle flared up. He ended up playing 5 minutes. Tough to say for sure if he's going to be able to go here. That'll be worth looking at, paying attention to. If he were to get into the starting lineup late there, he'd be a swap up at 4.9. We know how good Larkin can be. He's got 40 fantasy point upside. But to me, it seems like that ankle is just not going to get healed up before the end of the year. So they're going to have to proceed through this NIT tournament with him playing probably less than 10 minutes a game, which means he's not really going to be an option for us. That means Aziz Bandiago will have the opportunity to play 25 plus minutes, but as a major fouler, he just can't control himself. I don't think he will against San Fran. They have a bunch of guys who drive, relentlessly attack the rim. Mogbo's a problem. I think Bandiago ends up with those two early first half fouls, which we're just pretty much accustomed to seeing from him. On the San Fran side, Mogbo, he's not a big time scorer. He can score, but usually what we see from him is the really sexy peripheral stats, right? Like he's a threat to triple double. He most of the time will put up that 10 and 12 type of double double. We like him a lot. He's a reasonable price at 8.3. He was much higher earlier in the season. So pretty tough matchup on paper against Cincinnati, but I don't worry too much about matchups with him. He got a little bit too high priced there for a while at 9.3, 9.5 because his upside isn't that high for a 9.3, 9.5 type of player, but in low 8K range, I can definitely get back aboard on using him. Guards for San Fran are interesting. We have Malik Thomas at 5.6. This is another option between that 5 and 6K range. We have several we've talked about already. Thomas can be hit or miss, but for the most part, he is definitely one of their better guards. I'm very comfortable and confident using him even on the road here against Cincinnati. He just fits the type of lineup that I want to make, that semi-balanced build where I don't want to take a bunch of sub 4K punts. I still want to get 2, maybe 3 guys above 7.5, but I'm going to fill out the rest of my lineup with the Miles Tates, the Malik Thomases, those type of players. Then that leaves us with Marcus Williams, who's 7.4, the true best guard on the team for sure, but such a steep price increase from Thomas. He is there, for years, San Fran's had like that electric alpha guard who, takes shots at the end of games, can hit any bucket. Just a ton of fun to watch. That's Marcus Williams this year. They have a pretty nice trio. San Fran's a much better team than I think people probably realize. I think they're live to beat Cincinnati here. Ultimately, I think the Bearcats move on, but I certainly have interest in this game. And even if it turns into more of an ugly affair, we could still see 3 or 4 guys come out of here with 4 or 5x scores because they're used to playing that way. You were with me on Newman for a bit. You with me on some of the Cincinnati guys, Skillings, of course. What are some of the options here that you're feeling?
I think you broke it down pretty well. Skillings, I could go there just for the consistency aspect. 7-1. New Jersey product, by the way, I believe. I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure he's a South Jersey kid. Newman,
Blackwood. You're right. Blackwood, New Jersey.
Yeah. I think that's South Jersey somewhere. South Jersey is a complete different part of the state. We don't really recognize them, so can't tell you exactly where that is. But in Newman, you said it. Good rule of thumb is to just not play bad players. I'm not saying he's a bad player, but I don't know if I'll get there. I'm mostly fading this game. I think I mentioned Skillings being New Jersey guy. The other 2 interesting tidbits, we have Day Thomas and Dedan Thomas, both on the slate. So it's funny how their names are. We were talking about similar names and similar teams. And so that's pretty much it. I'm mostly fading this game. And then Lukosius, that one shooting expose that he put on was one of those performances where we get this guy's the best player of all time. Comment in the Discord. That's not going to happen again. If it does, I'll mention it, but I'm mostly fading this game. So pretty much everything that you said.
Yeah.
If anybody's interested in those mid-tier guys, I wouldn't be against it, but I'm mostly staying away.
Yeah, and just those type of games, like he shot 7 of 12 from deep, right? And then those type of games are just so ridiculous, and especially when you don't have them, because they'll just go on these streaks where it's like he grabs every rebound, he gets every assist, he scores every bucket. It's just like every time. And if you're watching the game, it's maddening. But if like say you're doing something else and you have the stat broadcast up, and literally as the stat line at the play-by-play is coming up, it's just seamless this, seamless that. It's like, come on.
And it's one thing to not have him. But it's one thing to not have him and have guys on the same team. Like if you just fade the game, I get it. I don't have Lukosius. But if you played a Thomas or a Skillings and all you're seeing is Lukosius, that's even more tilting. And I think that was one of those games where I played, I think it was Thomas and Newman or something, and it ended up being the Lukosius show. So that's what you don't want.
And then like he wasn't chalk that day, I don't believe, but then you'll get those spots where guys are chalk and right, like they're Michael Jordan out there. And then like the next game they won't be chalk or it won't be on the slate. And you'll go and look at their stat line and they put up like a 9. You're like,
or they give you the rug pull. It's the rug pull.
Yeah.
We're on this guy one game too late, and then he pulls the rug out and goes for 9. He shoots 1 for 12. That stuff happens far too often.
No, it is funny because, like I said, there's a lot of like stuff that I'm like superstitious about, and people are like, oh, it's all BS, but it's like, how does this continue to happen over and over again?
Every time.
All right, last game on the slate here, VCU versus Villanova. Biggie squad there. 6.5 point favorite is Villanova. That's seems a little high for a Nova team, but we'll see. Total of 131. Let's get your take on this one.
Well, Justin Moore's having a little bit of a resurgence at the end of the season. I don't think I'll get there. Eric Dixon's pretty much the only Nova guy you can trust on a game-to-game basis. I don't know if I'll pay 7-9 for him with some of the other options that we've talked about. The other thing is we're talking about this as the last game of the slate, but it's not really a hammer. I'm not, but usually you have that 11 o'clock game. You're thinking, oh, I want to be hanging around and then have that late hammer to kind of shoot up the leaderboard. But in this case, sometimes I'll make decisions based on that. You probably shouldn't, but Nova's just, they're not a fun team to watch. They're kind of like the Big East version of Michigan State. They don't really put up that many points, and their production's somewhat spread out at times other than Dixon. I don't know if I trust Moore's late season resurgence. And then I'm sure VCU will get some nice commentary on Sluga from you for VCU after what he did to you on Sunday.
Yeah, man. I always say, because like I'm the biggest, like I play cash games and single entry stuff, like so different than what you're supposed to do. And I just hate. That's why I don't really play pros like NBA, DFS and stuff, because you have to play those guys. Like if you don't play chalk in NBA, you're just like dead to rights. It's not even fun, right? So I just won't. I won't play guys because if I figure out it's harder. Ownership's definitely harder at times. I feel like I'm pretty in tune with what people are going to do and what guys are going to be chalk. I've been playing a long time, but every once in a while there'll be a player where I'm looking at it and it's like, man, he is too cheap. Yes, I know he's going to be really, really highly owned. And in Shoga's case, he just been like churning out these really easy 30+ fantasy point gains. He had the road game against UMass where he took 2 shots inexplicably. He just wasn't very good in that game, but he had 30s and 40s all around that. So it's like 6-8. They're in the title game against Duquesne. Surely Shoga can deliver us 30, right? Like that's just going to be a no-brainer. And he just proceeds to go out there and just stand around. He takes a few shots as he gets them in the corner, but of course he misses all of them. Doesn't get any rebounds, and it's just like the worst performance possible. And I just get so pissed at myself because I don't do it very often, but when I do it and I play somebody strictly because yes, they're going to be chalky, it rarely works out. Like if that chalk piece goes off, it's generally like, oh, I faded them. But when I do eat that chalk that I don't like, that's when they just brick entirely.
Happened with Duke Dean a couple of weeks ago. I think that was the same game I was hyping him up, and you probably talked you into playing him.
No. I was going to use him before that. You made a good case. Like it wasn't on you. It's just, it was frustrating though, for sure. It's like the 2 instances that I can think of off the top, like they both guys who normally are aggressive, just standing around, like no interest at all in playing. Like their point shaving.
Passive posh.
Yeah. Passive posh. Yeah. So I'm not, 7-3 for him is God no. Like if he was, I don't think he'd be chalk here on this slate, but if he was, like, good luck. I'm not doing that. And he was even worse because I'm such a big Joe Damascene guy and he dropped 37 in that game. So it's like, damn, that's double. That double hurts me. He was only 5'9" that day too. He's 6'3" here. I do like him. I'm probably not going to use very much of this game. Villanova games are very rarely appealing to me. When Tyler Burton's cheap and he's under 6K, at least it makes me perk up, right? Because we're so used to him from his Richmond days. But at this point, that version of him's just dead on this roster and under Kyle Neptune. We got that little bit of juice from him in the first 5 minutes a couple weeks ago, and we were bitching about that because, he gets benched inexplicably and then does nothing the rest of the game. So I hate the way that Neptune coaches. His rotation has way too many similar guys. Jordan Longino is probably out for this one. So that means we'll get more minutes for Brendan Housen, which we saw last week. He played 18 against Marquette. I think we see him play 20 plus here. He's 4-3. It's just okay. Overall, this game is it's pretty lame, for lack of a better term. Shane Barstow should be a good play on paper, but he can't seem to get more than 17. Like that's just what he maxes out at. So aside from maybe some Bama shares, yeah, this one is just not going to be my cup of tea. And you're right. Like, it's not a hammer game or anything like that. Everything is the way they've got this schedule, just kind of the way it worked out. I always go in the DK order of the games. All right, so that brings us to this portion here. We'll knock out a core, and then we'll get some bracket talk, because there's some folks in the chat that want to hear some of your hot take fire that you've been spitting. So for me, this is a much different slate from today. Like, there was really obvious value and cheap guys that you just had to play. Like, Esquera was 75% owned today. Like, it's puzzling to think that there were 25% of the field out there that were just like, no thanks. So that, that type of play, that just becomes really obvious. So there isn't necessarily a super cheapie where I'm just like, we have to click in. There's a few that I'm interested in, and we'll probably get to, but I don't have an auto free square like that. 7-6 for Robert Ford. That's the play for me. That's the Harris play from Howard. I won't call him the posh play of the day, because I think he probably does end up getting a significant amount of ownership. But he just has fantastic rates overall for Montana State, and he'll be the primary reason if they do advance, it'll be because of him. I do like, and I'm probably making a mistake, and I said I wouldn't do this, just like picking Tennessee to the Final Four. I said I wouldn't do this, but I really like Contavious Dozier for Grambling. Priced at just 5.8, elite shot and usage rates like we talked about earlier in the show. He is somebody that's in that 5 to 6K range. There are a plethora of them. I think that waters down ownership across the board. People, they already showed us today with the way that ownership shook out in the play-in game for the 16s. People took the obvious Esquera, and then we saw Harris up to 50%, which was a shocker. Nobody else in that game had more than like 10% at max. So I do think Dozier comes in here and gets sub 15% ownership, which is a mistake. He didn't play well last game. He will play well this game. He'll have a lot of usage. Whether he actually makes shots, that's another thing entirely, but that usage is going to be way too high for somebody priced only at 5.8. So that'd be core play number 2 for me. The third core, and I'm going to go up to one of these Indiana State guys, and I think it's just, for me, some safety, right? So I'm going to take Robbie Avila at 8-1. There are several options on this Sycamores team that I could roll with and feel great about, but to me, it's just really easy to get to Avila, fills a forward slot, and theoretically on paper, he should be a safe 4X or higher for us. All right. Do you have a core 2 or 3 guys that you're going to be, surrounding your lineups around tomorrow on this one?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at it. I think Jones, that we mentioned already, I'll go there. I like Miller on Wake. We talked about him. And then Xavier Lee on Princeton, just because he's 5'3". I kind of like that. And then you can find another pay up with some of the other value we talked about. You might be able to fit in another pay up there with alongside Jones. So I think that would be Ford. Sorry.
Okay, yeah. And then kind of the play that started to pick up here that is actually cheap. I don't want to gloss over. He didn't start. He played 34 minutes on Montana State. Sam Lecolat. He's below 4K. He has really solid rates. He doesn't start, so it's one of those plays where it's easy to be like, but he is playing consistent minutes. He does have a couple of 30s in his recent logs, so I suspect people will probably play him. It's definitely one of those plays that we're going to use him and he's going to brick. Garwi Dual ended up getting 14. It was so obvious when he stuck in the first half. This Lecolat play is probably going to mirror that, but I do suspect, and I want to make it clear that he'll be probably fairly high owned. With the way that people build their lineup. So be aware of 3-6 Sam Lecolat is a non-starter. If he plays 30 minutes off the bench, it's going to be hard not to use him. All right, jumping into PrizePicks here. Let's see. Ooh, we got some Caitlin Clark props, huh? Okay, let's get into to this. Bryce Harris props. We hit 2 of the 3. Can't ladder on PrizePicks, but you can on DraftKings. He had 3 different point props. 2 of the 3 hit tonight. Almost got there with a third, but felt pretty good about that. All right. Oh, we actually have fantasy scores up on PrizePicks tonight before. That is a surprise. None of them very appealing, though. You have Tristan Da Silva at 25.5 fantasy points. That's a pretty low number for him, but I feel very antsy about that Boise State game. Not enough for me to sit here and put him as a priority play. So my Favorite PrizePicks play at this moment, Kentavious Dozier, over 12.5 points. He's just the one I'm kind of, hitching my wagon to. I had him on the last slate in an alt build. Like I said, he didn't play particularly well. I do like him in this spot to play very well here and put up a 15+ number. Robert Ford over 15.5 points, also liking that one. He has a demon. They have these goblin and demons things where the goblin play is a little bit lower, doesn't pay as much. Demon play, which is a higher number, but it pays much better. He has a 19.5 number there. I don't see a goblin play for him, but we'll keep an eye out. And then the other one that I like a lot is Cody Williams over 8.5 points. I do feel like he's going to play better. They have to play him 25+ minutes. And again, kind of showing why he's an NBA prospect. If he's not, less than 50%, he should be able to score 10+ points. All right, that gets us out of the DFS. We finished up with some time left over on the slate. Now, last night, right at the second half, I went in depth with my bracket and my final four, which ended up being UConn, Baylor, Wisconsin, and Tennessee. Tennessee, UConn in the title game. UConn winning it. A little bit of contrarian in me there, going with the chalky champion in UConn. So I want to talk with you about the bracket stuff. And it looks like behind you have a blown up bracket there. So I'm digging that. I like that background a lot. That's we're talking before the show. You said your girl had made up a couple of those. So you track your picks there as you go with the big board.
Yeah, we've done it for a couple of years now. We go to the dollar store, just get a big piece of cardboard, map out the brackets, fill them out, cross it out with the red marker. That whole thing. So this is actually the first draft. What I do is I'm a very late bracket filler outer. I usually wait till like Wednesday night and then start cranking them out. I don't know if that's just, I'm that type of person when it comes to anything fantasy football, fantasy baseball, anything. I'm always waiting till the last minute to draft because I'm terrified to miss any news or notes that could affect my strategy. Like in this case, we did get the McCullough news. With plenty of time before their matchup, I think on Thursday. But yeah, so this was my first draft that I put together, and it's definitely subject to change, though. I'll say that.
Yeah. So are you one of those folks? Like, I know some people that they make the one bracket and that's what they do, or do you have 10+ brackets that you're throwing out in different contests, or what do you find yourself? How many brackets do you normally end up with in a normal year?
I probably tack on one or two every year. I think I started out with a core of 2 or 3 contests, just family, friends, stuff like that. It seems like every year add to that pile. I think this year I'll probably get up to about 5 or 6 legitimate ones. So what I'll do is I will have at times the same final four. I might change the champion in one. I might have a couple toss-up matchups, maybe in the Sweet 16 or Elite 8 that can really kind of be a domino effect depending on who I choose. I might go one direction on one bracket and the other since I'm so 50-50 about that pick, just to kind of diversify a little bit. But for now, I really only have this one behind me. I'll make some more. I'll probably tweak some things and come up with different combinations. But I'll end up crossing out a lot of picks. I hope I do, because as much as I like filling out the brackets, and as much as I like being right, I like upsets better. And I like seeing Cinderellas. So at times I'll even be rooting against my own bracket. I'll be honest.
Yeah, for sure. And I got to make one of those blown up brackets. I love that idea. Get one up so I can have it behind me tracking it. But the reason I ask is just I know a lot of people run all these different brackets, and I'm one of those guys it gets hard for me to be like, oh, did I wanted that to happen, right? Oh, I did, so I usually have
you lose track.
2 or 3 myself. I find myself sticking to my picks though, because I'm very hardline. I think this is going to happen this year with my final 4 picks. I think that I will probably run maybe a couple of extra brackets, just in case, because the Wisconsin pick, obviously, that's the chances of that actually happening are probably not great. I did go out to the DK Sportsbook today and put a future on them to win the region because it was plus 1,600 or something. So I sprinkled a little bit on that. But we're going to have a bunch of contests. Obviously we had the employees one at FTN there. We're also going to do one for the Discord and the Super Show. So we're going to have lots of contests. Did a player draft today for RotoWire. We're going to have some of those tomorrow. So it's funny you say waiting till the last minute. I'm kind of the same way, the slates come out early. I definitely checked it, but I'm really going to dive in, in them all day tomorrow, of course. and really kind of waiting till that last minute to make sure we have all the news. And that's smart of you to do your drafts that way too, because I'm sure that's got to suck when you draft somebody that you're really high on a million times, then all of a sudden, they're going to be, on the DL for the next 6 months. Like, okay, well, my season's done, right? So with the brackets, I know you said you usually wait, but I'm sure you've had a chance to fill that one out, and you've got some pretty strong takes, which you drop in the Discord. There's some teams that you like, you don't like. Who are a few of the sleeper teams that maybe maybe some people are talking about them, sure, but what are some teams like the masses aren't necessarily going to pick to go very far that you think have a chance to, maybe go a few rounds or possibly all the way, not necessarily like, an early round upset or anything, but just a team that rarely gets talked about by the masses that you think could make a deep run in the tournament?
I'm actually surprised I know you said to pick a team that isn't being talked about by the masses, but they are getting a little bit of juice. It's New Mexico. New Mexico is the team that I was really high on. I remember watching the selection show saying, 6 or 7. Anytime the 6 or the 7 spot came up, I said, here comes New Mexico. Here comes. Yeah. And they just didn't show up. They ended up being an 11. We found out that they were a bid stealer. They weren't even going to make the field if they didn't win the Mountain West tournament. But I do like them in that first round matchup against Clemson. I do think they can win at least 2 or 3 games if they get by Clemson. I like their guard play: Donovan Dent, Jalen House, Jamal Mashburn. You're not going to find a better threesome of guards than that trio of guys. I also like top and down low. They're a really good rebounding team, and so they're a team I was looking at right away. Unfortunately, it seems like everybody's on them. And then I know Kentucky's a big blue blood name. A lot of people are on them, but I do have them in my Final Four. I think that just any team that can score 100, 110 on you at any point is dangerous to me, even if they don't defend. I have a little faith that Calipari is going to have them locked down on defense a little bit to avoid being upset early. But I have this vision in my head of just Reed Shepherd just going nuts in this tournament for some reason. I don't know why. I think it was during that Tennessee game a couple of weeks ago where he just seemingly never missed a shot. And I was thinking this guy's going to be one of those players in the tournament that he's going to win most outstanding player in the final or something stupid like that. Just have this weird premonition about that. So Kentucky I have going pretty far. So those are the 2 teams I'm looking at. I also mentioned in our staff bets article, I think South Carolina could make a little bit of a run. I think Nevada could make a run. You're probably thinking I'm a little Mountain West biased at this point. But no, I do believe Nevada is a legitimate team. They made a run in the past. I think Elite 8 maybe like 5 or 6 years ago with the Martin twins.
So, that team was amazing. That team was great. Loaded.
So I mean, it's not impossible to think. Again, they got to win the matchup, the second matchup, most likely against, I'm blanking who it is. Against Arizona. I don't know if I trust Arizona. So if Nevada gets by Arizona, it could be similar to New Mexico, where they could just go straight to the Final Four in a perfect world. So Nevada is probably another one. That's a team that probably isn't being talked about by the masses as much.
Yeah, and that Nevada team, Jordan Caroline, that was a great team.
Caroline,
Steve Alford gets no respect, and it's probably deserved not to. But early in the season, when I'm always hyping up Washington, and Nevada came to our house, second game of the season and beat us 83-76. I got so many texts from people like, "You lost to Alford. Is Nevada that good?" And I was like, well, I just watched this game, entirely, and they seemed pretty damn good. And then they went on to just win game after game. I know they got just pelted by Drake there early on, but for sure, this Nevada team, if healthy, there's a couple of guys banged up from Blackshear to, your guy, the never high usage Hunter McIntosh, except for the last month of the season, apparently. So they're a team. I didn't necessarily look at them, but that's an interesting spot to talk about. I like the South Carolina call.
They're the anti-Iowa State. They win on the road.
There you go. Yeah. I like the South Carolina call. I was on the Mean Street show earlier talking about the Midwest region, and that was one that I thought was a sleeper. I have them eventually losing to Tennessee in their the rubber match there. But I seen a lot of people picking Oregon, and yes, I'm an Oregon hater.
I'm
I
sure
will
that
pick
makes
against
you
them all
really
the time.
happy. I'm sure
Yeah,
you love.
yeah.
I'm sure
I'm
you're
a
loving.
I'm a big time Oregon hater for sure. But and Dante's, he put up such a huge game in the Pac-12 title, so of course people are going to be hyping, and they got nobody to stop Dante. What are they going to do? But guard play wise, Shellstad, Tracy, Cuisinart, they're fine, but I think Cooper and Michi are better, and ultimately that guard play is going to carry them. I think Murray Boyles is emerging at the right time, so I think this South Carolina team, I've been enamored with them for a while. Lamar Paris, well-deserved extension. Would not be shocked to see him win a couple of games here. And for what it's worth, I do have Akron. I'm not going to go over all my picks again, get me going here. But I did pick Akron over Creighton, which might be a psychotic thing to do. So in the second round, I have South Carolina beating Akron there. But I do think that South Carolina's path to Tennessee is solid enough. What about segueing into upset picks? We talked about some sleepers. The 12 over 5. People always get enamored with that. 13s over 4 happen a lot. Maybe 11s. Are there any upsets that you're super high on? They can be popular. It doesn't have to be super contrarian. But what are one or two upsets that you're picking in your brackets? You're betting. You're really high on them.
Yeah, let me actually consult the bracket because, of course, I filled it out. I had it all in my head, and then as soon as we came on here, I just forgot everything.
It's all good.
So, I actually have Vermont over Duke. I know that might sound. I don't think many people are on that. People have been on Vermont in the past. They can shoot it. This year's version of Vermont's a better defensive team, and I don't like what I've seen from Duke this year. They have a lot of talent, but Filipowski at times gets into foul trouble. Their guards are good. I know you need guards in March, but Duke's just come out flat. It almost seems like there's something wrong with their chemistry. I don't know if they've just played poorly against North Carolina and obviously losing to NC State as well, but they're certainly not coming into this tournament with a lot of momentum. I think Vermont's been flirting with upsets in the past. I actually like them to pull that. It's a 4-13. I mean, that's usually a pretty popular pick, but it seems like nobody's on them. And I'm sure you'll like hearing this, but because I have Vermont over Duke, I also have Wisconsin over James Madison, and then Wisconsin going to the Sweet 16. And then I also have them over Texas A&M going to the Elite Eight. So that's my one section of the bracket that's kind of wacky. Having Texas A&M take down Houston, having Vermont take down Duke, which opens the door for Wisconsin to get to the Elite Eight. I know you probably like that because you have Wisconsin, I think, in the Final Four.
Yeah.
So that's probably the wackiest part of my bracket. I also did take Drake over Iowa State just because I want to put my money where my mouth is with Iowa State. I know I've been not necessarily talking down on them, but trying to justify why there's a lot of outrage of why Iowa State was the worst 2 seed coming into the tournament. But I think, again, you got to win on the road. If you just look at their road games, I think they're 5-5, something like that against actually formidable opponents. So you look at their resume, they look like an average team on the road. And I don't know if I trust them away from Ames. And I do like that Iowa versus Iowa, Drake, Iowa State matchup. I think Drake can win that. So Drake's another one of my little Cinderellas, but some people are on that as well. Everything else looks, it's a little wackiness that I talked about, but I don't think I have anything else too crazy. I didn't want to get too wild because I know if you take too many upsets, you're just setting yourself up for failure. So you do have to kind of go chalk in the end, but those are probably the matchups that I have that are more bracket busting than anything.
Yeah, and I like that what you said, because it's so easy to get enamored with several upsets and trying to get really fancy, and then right away round one, that team that you pegged to make a deep run, they lose. It's basically done. Everybody, 90% of the brackets out there picked the other way, and you're just putting yourself in a hole. So you have to really be kind of smart with that. So you got to pick your spots, and my bracket is fairly chalky in spots like that. But I've picked Grand Canyon, Wisconsin. Try to pick some teams like that I think have a legitimate chance. Now I love the Vermont call. John Becker's been there forever. It was seeing the highlights every year when the tournament comes out. We get the highlights from the Vermont Syracuse game, which was 04-05. And
quarantine from the parking lot.
yeah, just the irrational confidence to be able to be like, F Boeheim, F the orange, where there's plenty of time, but I'm just going to chuck this Steph Curry-esque, pre-Steph Curry-esque before
Manesh-like shot.
Maybe we should be calling it the Sorrentine, not the Steph Curry. But yeah, that is just, it's so phenomenal how they confidently took that. And they've been so close since, like 2019. They what was it? Florida State. They actually pushed Florida State quite good as a 13. Didn't end up winning. I know they were close a couple of years ago to beating Arkansas as a 13. Ended up losing by, I think, 4. Arkansas was really flirting with disaster there. And then, of course, last year they got pelted by Marquette, just a superior team. So they've been in. I mean, perennially they're in the tournament, and everybody loves Coach Becker, and they're gonna get it done. They're gonna make it happen. This Vermont team, they have the pieces. So I could see that, because Duke, it's kind of funny, like, and I always say it, and Duke wins their fair amount, but how many times can we go back, like every 2 or 3 tournaments, and be like, there's a big upset over Duke, there's a big, like, it happens all the time.
Lehigh, Mercer, like some real like head scratchers. So 4-13 against Vermont, I'm surprised more people aren't on it, but it might just be the Duke factor. There's a lot of casual people. They see Duke, especially on the 4 line. And maybe they pick against them when they're a 1 seed, but I don't think they see Duke, they kind of just advance them, the casual people.
Yeah, the still like old school in people's minds as casual as blue bloods. Like, you're going to see, Duke, just when you talk, when I tell people what I do, and oh, I'm doing my day job or whatever, like, here's what else I do. And they're like, oh, so you talk about Duke a lot. I'm like, no. And then they look at me like I'm crazy. And it's like, okay, you think Duke is all of college basketball. Got it. So I think that's the main reason. So knowing that, that's a nice little spot to pick and maybe get over on the field, because I'm sure a lot of people are going to pick Duke, and that possible matchup between Wisconsin and Duke, like, I know everyone's picking Duke there too. So that's primary reason why I like it for leverage Wisconsin. But I think they're just playing really well with AJ Storr. That's something they haven't had. And James Madison's lost very few games, and I get it. And they beat Sparty, which I know, you have your take on, but I don't think James Madison has the right personnel to beat Wisconsin. I could certainly be wrong, but that's one that I just don't see. All right, so there's some upsets, there's sleepers. What's your, at this moment, I know you've written it down on there, but what's the final 4 that you're looking at? It can be the one that you filled out there, or perhaps you've had time to think of a different one, but what as it stands right now, what final 4 are you rocking with?
Yeah, I'll go with the one I filled out here, just because I gave it some thought. Like I said, I could change it, but at least what I have here is UConn, a little chalky. But I forgot to mention, I do have UConn beating BYU in the Elite 8 to get to that Final 4 spot. That's a little, I don't know how many people have that, but I think because I have Iowa State losing, kind of opens the door for BYU to get a couple spots down there. But I have UConn coming out of the East. I do have North Carolina coming out of the West, as I wear my North Carolina jersey right here.
Love it.
I do like North Carolina. I just like their defense. They're 6th KenPom defensive efficiency this year. I think I trust their scoring actually more if they match up against Arizona. Caleb Love it has 2 for 15 in his revenge game written all over it. He's going to brick all of his shots. I don't think I trust it. And call me a homer, but I just like RJ Davis, one of the best guards in the country. I think Baycott, they might play through him a little bit more in the tournament, knowing that it's win or go home. And I like the X factors of Harrison Ingram and the shot making of Cormac Ryan. I just trust them the most. So I have UConn in the East, UNC in the West. I have Kentucky out of the South. I know I mentioned them before. The reason I have them is because, again, I have Wisconsin going a little deep. That top section, I have Texas A&M and Wisconsin, which kind of opens the door for Kentucky if they can get by Marquette. And that vision I have of Reed Shepherd that I mentioned before, I can't get it out of my head. So I took Kentucky out of the South. And then the Midwest, I'm sure you can guess I do not have Purdue. I have them losing to Tennessee in the Elite 8. So Tennessee, Kentucky, UConn, and UNC is my final 4.
Love it. We're pretty similar there with the Tennessee and obviously UConn. That's just the one with UConn. Like I wanted to look at a different champion because obviously, you know, the number one overall seed, most people, casuals alike, and it's just so hard to pick against them. But I just couldn't because, you know, dating back to last year's tournament, and I'm very openly like, this team is going to be a championship dynasty for the next 3 or 4 years. Not saying they're going to win 4 or 5 in a row, but they're going to be in the mix like for a while. And just looking at the way that their roster is made up in this tournament, yes, they're in a tough region, but ultimately they know how to win against all opponents. They've been there before. It's just, I don't know how to pick a different champion. So even if I make other brackets, I don't know if I can consciously do so. Maybe if I'm in like one of those, like, when we do the Discord one, maybe like with a lot of sharp players that are there, maybe I'll pick a different one just in case I need like a leverage spot there down at the end or something, you know what I mean? But it's really hard to pick anybody else. All right, so we covered the DFS slate. We got bracket talk, everything out of the way. I think before we get out of here, it would be good. You know, this is your first time coming on. Hopefully you'll have a chance to join us. There's going to be a lot of opportunities to do so. I know it's late. I really do appreciate that, so I won't keep you too long. But I want to kind of give you a open floor here to, you know, talk about anything. And I do this with all the co-hosts, you know, anything that's on your mind related to CBB. And use this as kind of like we call a therapy session, you know, tournament. Maybe you want to sound off about the committee. Maybe you want to talk about Michigan State. Maybe you want to talk about Zach Edey. I don't know, anything that you want to take a couple minutes to just kind of clear the air on and get off of your chest here before we go.
Yeah, Zach Edey, I don't know if I'll go there. I know a little bit of a touchy subject in the past might have rubbed some people the wrong way. I guess, you know, speaking of that, I think one thing that I want to say is, if you're in the Discord and I'm saying these absolutely wild, bold takes, sometimes maybe even borderline inappropriate, like it's all just hyperbole. I mean, I just do it because I'm having fun. Like I say stupid things. It's just entertainment to me. It's not. I'm not saying. You know, I was talking about Tony Bennett earlier. Like, oh, this guy, you know, with his team that can't score. Like, when is he ever going to change? Like, I know it may seem like I don't think Tony Bennett's a good coach, but
Right.
you know, I say things, I exaggerate things. It's just kind of my thing. I hope people understand that it's mostly hyperbole. Sometimes it's a little truthful, but I think that's one thing. I will talk about the committee a little bit as well. We've mentioned this in the Discord. I think other people have mentioned it. I've seen it talked about on TV, but just the consistency with looking at the metrics. And what really got me, I know I'm the resident Michigan State hater, but if you replace Michigan State with literally anything else, like I live in Long Branch, New Jersey, Long Branch State, if that was the name of the school with that exact resume, I don't think they get in. I think Michigan State got in because they're Michigan State. It's Tom Izzo. And when the committee was asked about it fairly, they talked about how they had quality wins or big wins. They didn't really. 3-9 in quad one. So if that's what you're looking at, I don't think they performed up to expectation. And that's the same criteria that they use to dock a team like Indiana State. I believe they only had one quad one win. But again, they don't have the same opportunities to play the type of schedule that Michigan State will because teams don't want to go there. So if you're talking about having big wins and they're 3-9 against quad one, I don't see how that's consistent when you're docking other teams for maybe a similar type of 3-9 record. Or there's many other teams that had way more than 3 quad one wins. So just the consistency aspect. Then looking at certain teams with the net, they're talking about, oh, they had good metrics. They had good metrics. They stood. Well, what about New Mexico? New Mexico had I think a 22 in the net, and they weren't even going to make the tournament. They were considered a bid thief. So if you're looking at the net and saying this team got in because they had strong metrics, well, what metrics are you looking at? Because clearly it can't be the net if you think New Mexico was not a tournament team at 22. So I don't know if I'm going in circles here, but just consistency with the committee. You have to be more transparent with what you're looking for. If you want the net, say you want the net. If you want road wins, say you want road wins. If you want quad one wins, say you want quad one wins. If you want quad 1 and 2 record, for example, if you're 8-12 against quad 1 and 2, that's not as good as a team that's, say, 5-4. If you want to look at winning percentage in quad 1 or 2 games, just tell us what it is so that when we go into the selection Sunday, we have a better idea of who's going to get in, who's not. So we don't get a team like Virginia into the field where we have to watch a game where a team can't put the ball in the basket to save their life. And we could have been watching a team like Indiana State. I'm not saying that Indiana State should have been in, but again, I don't believe Virginia should have been in. I don't think their metrics stood up to the test. I don't think they had enough quality wins. And then you get a product on TV tonight that, most people probably turned off midway through the second half. That was not a tournament team. So I'm just asking the committee one time to just be a little bit more consistent, be a little bit more transparent, and then maybe we won't have these kind of things in the future.
Yeah, and it seems like the various committees every year, like especially with the advent of the net ranking, there's just no clarity on what all goes into it. And I know it's a super secret formula, and they don't want to give it up, but because of that, these committees, I don't think they have the full picture of what they're dealing with. And then you get those answers where it's like, oh, well, Virginia had that quality quad 1 win. And it's like, okay, where the Florida win on a neutral court? Okay, cool. Then, you've got a 54 net ranking. You look at Indiana State's where, right. They didn't necessarily, win a ton in the quad 1. They went 4-1 in that quad 2. Are they being punished for that Southern Illinois loss? Are they being punished for their quad 4 loss against Illinois State? I don't know. They played Alabama competitive for a half, I guess. They very nearly beat Drake on a neutral. They obviously, that didn't factor in. So it's very strange because if you're using that net ranking, hey, they're 28. Here's Virginia, who's, what were they, 54? Okay, why did they get in? Why didn't Indiana State? Because it's not the quad 1 quality wins like you're talking about. If it's strength of schedule for non-conference, like they were saying for some teams, okay, why did that apply to some but not others? And like you said, nobody's going to play at Indiana State because they know there's a very good chance they'll lose. They won't give them that opportunity. And some of those mid-majors, they're asking to play these P5s on a neutral then. Or some of them are saying, fuck it, I'll play you at your house. There's been a ton that have said that to Calipari in Kentucky, and he's like, nope, they won't take those games. They just won't take the games because they're scared.
Yeah, and you said about the bad losses too, just before I forget. If you're punishing teams for bad losses, and then we let FAU into the tournament as an 8 seed, and then they have multiple quad 4 losses. They lost to freaking Temple. I mean, Temple, who's throwing games. They couldn't even beat Temple, who's literally point shaving at this point. Again, hyperbole,
right?
But there is some wishy-washiness with their spreads, and they couldn't beat Temple. They didn't win their league. If they weren't in the Final Four last year, are they even close to making the field with these damaging losses? And I'm sure some of these damaging quad 4 losses hurt other teams, but why didn't it hurt FAU? So again, no consistency.
Yeah, no, there's got to be some form of consistency or just flat out be like, here's the criteria we're looking at. And if that's going to differ from committee to committee, fine. But then they need to then say, like, when you're going to be the committee that year and what you're looking at, like, tell ahead of time, months in advance, like, here's what we're going to be grading on so that people know what they're going to be doing. And the Big 12, obviously, we know there's all that talk about gaming the system where, they just beat each other up, but they're all great wins and great losses. Like, that's just the way it is. They're playing the game. They're until you make changes, that's going to continue to happen. But the whole, like, your non-con isn't strong enough for this team. But hey, Michigan State went out and they played all these hard teams. Plus they played in the Big Ten. Like, we have to factor that in. They lost all those games, but they played those games.
Yeah, you played hard teams, but you did poorly against them.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing. Like, Indiana State, you had a non-con that was just okay. You play in the MVC, you won a lot of games, but you just didn't play anybody. Like, that's just such a slap in the face for those teams, right?
And aren't a lot of the committee's made up mostly of athletic directors, correct?
Yeah.
So again, they have lots of things on their plate. I'm sure they're extremely busy. I'm sure they're not watching 11 o'clock Eastern game between, Mountain West squads on a Tuesday night. There's no chance they're watching those games.
No.
And then they have to rely on these metrics that they're not using in a consistent manner. Can't we just get people that watch the games and actually see, I know an eye test isn't necessarily a metric, but to some extent, you can see certain teams that are tournament worthy or not. I don't know. I don't think these people are watching the games like they should be. And then, they're using weird metrics and inconsistency. I don't know if it'll ever change. I'm sure there's people who are qualified to do it. The bracketologists who are out there appear to be much better at predicting the field, at least in terms of the quality of the field. But I don't know if we'll ever get there. There's a lot of change in the NCAA, but it doesn't seem like the selection committee is one of those things that's imminently going to change at any point.
Yeah, and the the CBS guys call them computer trickers. There's teams like they actually, with the metrics that those committees and everybody does use, like, oh, they look great, but then you see them play games and it's like, oh man, this team, they're not actually that good. I mean, Virginia is one of those teams, right? And it's with the talk of expanding the tournament and all the changes that I mean, everything else in college basketball and college football and college sports in general, as you mentioned, is changing. Where there's very likelihood they will expand the tournament, which I'm not in favor of, but money talks, right? And they're going to have to, if they're going to do that, then the criteria for what deserves to be in and what doesn't deserve to be in has to be transparent. It has to be uniform. There can be no gray area with this, because what's going to happen if they expand it, they're just going to use that as a way to put more crap teams in. And I don't mean to dog on teams that are,
I mean, more Big Ten teams.
Yeah, that's a relative term. This team's this team sucks. Like, that's a relative term, right? Like, putting in more of those type of teams, like getting, expanding so that we can get Oklahoma in. And no disrespect to Oklahoma. I think Porter Moser's a great coach, but Oklahoma's good. They would just lose in the first round. I don't think they would win a game. So like, what, expanding for them to play one game and getting their money, like, oh, that's such a great product that we're having. And I love college basketball. I'll watch almost any game. And I, during the season, I have ESPN Plus. I watch a ton of like mid and low majors on demand. Like, when a lot of people are watching shows and stuff at night, like when I'm writing articles or typing, playing, whatever, I'm watching, I have that playing in the background. So I'm watching those games. So I'll watch almost anything, but I don't want to expand just to put in a bunch of mediocre P5 teams. I want to expand so that we can get Indiana State in, or the Big East, who deservedly should have had Seton Hall in. Like, I kind of want to see Seton Hall make a run in the NIT. And I'm excited that Coach Holloway and his players are like, yeah, we want to do this. Let's do this. And Iowa, say what you will about them, they're taking the same mantra. Like, they want to play in the NIT. And you saw them today. They laid 90 on Kansas State. They look damn good.
Yeah.
So there's something's got to change here. If we're going to expand the tournament, we definitely have to have a explanation for what goes into the net. We have to, here we're grading 20% on non-con out of the, scheduling. So, okay, we need to schedule better. They told us that. Let's do it. We do it and you still leave us out. Well, that's not good enough. So what else do we have to do? Okay, we're going to look at quad one opportunities, whether you win or lose them. If you have 10, 15 quad one opportunities, but you went 2-13, well, that's still going to be better than somebody who went 1-5 or, played 4 of those opportunities and went 4-0. Doesn't make sense, but if that's what they're grading on, then we need to know that. So instead of these answers, like you said, like, oh, Michigan State had, more quad one wins, better quality. Virginia had better quality, when clearly what we're looking at from the net pages doesn't show us more quality. So there's going to be something else there. And I also feel like the comment, I keep harping on this, we were up till 2 a.m. making the bracket. Like, I feel like they got it up. They looked at it. They're like, oh, shoot, that can't be like that. Well, it's pretty late. Do you think anyone will notice? It'll be okay. And that was that. I feel I honestly would have loved to have been a fly on the wall, because I feel like something like that transpired. Not word for word, but they ended up settling for that bracket because they didn't want to continue to stay up late making it.
That's exactly what happened. Yeah. It'd be like, right now it's 2:18 on the East Coast. They definitely just said, VCU will win tomorrow and we'll put them as an 11 seed. And then when it didn't happen, they just, got lazy, threw Duquesne in there, stuff like that. Couple other seeds were probably like that as well, where you could tell that they had one thing, and then based on the results, they just decided, let's just keep this template. We'll just shuffle things around.
Yeah.
But, and then the last thing I'll say is just, I know everybody knows I'm a Michigan State hater. I'm sure if you're in the Discord, everyone knows I'm a Never Tolu guy. And I just find it extremely poetic how the first game of the NCAA tournament, first round, Mississippi State, Michigan State. It's a team I want to lose so badly versus a player who I actively root against. I mean, heck, I named it the Never Tolu movement. And I hope Tolu Smith, look, I'll remove the hashtag. I'll remove the phrase from him. If he goes out there and has a legacy performance and defeats Michigan State in the first round, then Tolu Smith is free of my wrath going into next year. Although is he a senior?
Yeah, I don't know if he has another.
Does he have another year? Oh, I hope not. But if he does, he'll be free of my wrath if he's able to put together a nice win against Michigan State. And
yeah, I think he's done. He started his career at Western Kentucky, like COVID era, so he should be done. So your distaste for Michigan State is greater than your distaste for Tolu Smith. I'm glad you clarified that so that we know what you're going to be rooting for. Perfect. That you might have to have a lineup with Tolu in it. Actually, you might.
I'm just concerned. Like I'll put the hex on Michigan State. Tolu Smith will have a legacy game, and then I'll have another one and knock out UNC. And then I'll go back to hating him.
Yeah, right.
And there's so many scenarios here. Somebody's got to win that game, but whoever does, I just hope lays an egg the next one. It's I just have a bad feeling about it. It's almost like I talked all this crap, and now one of these teams is going to go up against North Carolina, who I obviously want to go deep, and a little scared about that. But we'll see.
I don't blame you, man, because you know how it is. It takes one bad shooting night to make your season end.
Yep.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on, and trust me, with me, I do the whole tilting thing and we week out. It's really just kind of like a gimmick that we do. Like, sure, we'll get tilted or whatever, but I think for the most part, the regulars in the Discord all understand that, you don't actually mean some of that stuff, and that what you're saying is because, yes, you're frustrated. Virginia's terrible, but you don't think Tony Bennett's a bad coach, like you said. We'll get new people that sign up with us, and it takes them a minute or two to get acclimated with what's going on. But once they do, most people embrace the way that we are in the Discord. So I always appreciate your hot takes. You have done a fantastic job ingraining in the community. You're an excellent editor. I was just complimenting on you for one of the pieces of mine that you had fixed up for me. I always appreciate working with you. I'm happy that we got a chance to talk, hang out on air. And like I said, over the next, 2.5 weeks, we're going to have a lot of shows, a lot of opportunities. If you want to come on again anytime, please feel free to reach out to me and do so. You're welcome anytime, my friend.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm sure I'll reach out to you, and I know it's late here, but I'm usually up late anyway. So anytime you want to have me on, I'd love to come back and spit some more fire and hyperbole.
Sounds good. I appreciate it. And thanks to everybody who tuned in live or watching on demand. Please make sure before you head out, you smash that like button. We'll be back tomorrow night, right around 9:30 p.m. PST. Mike Kutry, the prop betting maestro that he is going to be on, and we're going to be talking in depth first round game set, 14 game slate. It is going to be a long one, but it is going to be a good one. You will not want to miss that. Appreciate everybody's continued support of the Super Show. Thanks again to Adam and everybody else out there. FTN Network. See you guys next time.